Hello there, and welcome to the Rambling to Myself podcast. I'm your host, Aaron, and this is episode 2 of the podcast. Today, we'll be talking about Comic Fiesta 2018, which I recently attended and discovered from my friend who invited me to it. And for those of you who don't know, since I never really mentioned this, I am Malaysian, so yeah, Comic Fiesta at the KLCC. Just some quick details before diving in fully. I've never really attended any conventions like this before. I've only had experiences in free conventions such as the book sale convention called Big Bad Wolf and some IT conventions here and there held in our halls that were pretty much free to enter. So yeah, as for this convention, the Comic Fiesta, it was mainly focused on anime and Japanese themed stuff. Booths were plentiful, although repetitive, and some performances were held on the upper floors. And despite what you may think, Comic Fiesta, there was not much involvement of any Americanized comics such as content from Marvel and DC, although there were cosplayers that did cosplay as Spider-Man and Deadpool and Thanos. But yeah, I'll go more in depth about the booths and performances after talking about my personal experiences and the stuff I did during the 2 days at the event. The convention can be separated into basically as for the layout, the physical layout of the thing. It was 2 main sections with a tunnel in the middle. I'll put a picture up on the screen so you guys can see it. I'll just briefly explain what each part and how the place looks like in general. The red and green parts are the outdoor areas that serve as a line and entry point, so you can pretty much disregard that whole left bottom section since it's not really part of the convention space, so to speak. It's just to walk in. The blue square is a place where some esports were happening. PUBG on the first day, both mobile and PC players, and CSGO on the second day. Might have been more games played throughout, but I didn't really care about that much since I was there for mostly a cosplay and to peruse the booths, I suppose. The orange and red sections are the booths, which had a mixture of goods being sold, and some of them had some audience participation, although very sparse throughout the thing. One of those was the Marvel vs. DC thing, although that was pretty much the only thing related to, Americanized cartoons, as I mentioned earlier, and comics, since most of it was anime and stuff. So yeah, there were also some gaming sections with some anime games that I'm not really knowledgeable enough to comment on. The purple area was the stage for live shows. It was this weird upstairs area, quite hard to navigate to, but oh well. It was connected by this escalator, which you had to use the exit to get to. And some people might just mistaken it as a exit to the outside, because that's what the exit looks like also. So, well, I guess they could have done a better job of putting signs up to let you know where to go. Yeah, sure, there were some stand-up signs that said this is here, but it pointed to the exit and you're like, oh, am I supposed to turn or something? Because the other display was on the door of the thing, which was kind of on the wall, which you wouldn't really be able to see unless you were looking at the wall, which was kind of behind you. So well, I'll move on to the 2 days, I suppose, and talk about my experiences before I talk about my general thoughts on the whole thing and my critiques, which I have a lot of. As for my journey on the first day, I'd say in general I really didn't enjoy myself. My first impression when I entered the damn hall was how empty it was. There was barely any decorations. And sure, there were a lot of people, which is a very big negative, but that's really about all there is in terms of what was going on. It was just essentially a lot of people in a small space. I just spent the whole day being squished and memorizing the layout as well as the products being sold, so I could come back on the second day and swoop with the products and just get the fuck out of there, because it really wasn't enjoyable. And if you had claustrophobia, I feel bad for you. Luckily on the second day it was much better because there were lesser people and I was much less inclined to ditch as a result, and I did enjoy myself, but we'll get back to that. My main bulk of enjoyment from there on the first day of being in the damn Fiesta was looking at other cosplayers and pointing out the characters to my friends who were much less knowledgeable about certain animes, like, hey look, that's a blood cell, hey look, that's a JoJo reference, stuff like that. And yeah, as I just mentioned, there were a lot of people cosplaying cells at work, with white blood cells and platelets predominantly taking up the spotlight, with some red blood cells here and there. That's because that's much easier to cosplay, I suppose. Since white blood cells is just a white cap with some Japanese words, I think, and white clothes, which is an easier entry point since the cells are pretty much humanized version of cells, which eliminates the big need for makeup and flashy wigs or any giant props that other people may have to use to show their character. I was, however, really surprised by the amount of Cyberlife androids and Kanekis from the series Tokyo Ghoul, as I didn't really realize how big they were in pop culture, so that was a big surprise to me, because I'm a really big fan of Tokyo Ghoul, the manga, not the anime. The anime is ass. But yeah, aside from the actual cosplays, the go-to normie cosplays were simple wigs or cat ears. There were a lot of them on the train when I was taking the LRT to head to KLCC. So yeah. As for me, I cosplayed as Jotaro from JoJo Bizarre Adventure, which I was quite saddened by, because there was an apparent lack of JoJo fans, as I only came across one guy with a Kira Yoshikage tie, and a Josuke who was purchasing some pins, I suppose. And yeah, as for the event itself, the management was really bad. Lack of crowd control, lots of moving sardine can situations throughout the whole fiesta. There was a clear lack of communication, as staff members only really came in to help with the crowd control a few hours into the damn event. And they could have done a better job of, like, my friend, he mentioned that they could have said something like limiting the amount of people they could enter at once, because it was quite apparent the hall couldn't accommodate for everyone, because it was really hard to move, and at some points, especially in intersections, you couldn't even really move. But I'll go more into depth about the incompetence of the management later. Anyways, that's about wraps it for day 1. It's pretty much a horrible experience all in all, a 3 out of 10, as I told my friend, a very low 3 out of 10, because the only good thing was the people there and the community. And as for the event, it just felt really cheap and commercialized. Moving on to day 2, I definitely enjoyed it way more. I was cosplaying Shotaro from the Kamen Rider series, Kamen Rider Double or W, and met a few fellow riders with belts. I was also approached for some pictures, so that was pretty cool, I guess. It really lifted up my mood, and a lot of people did notice it, since if you go to subreddit or like search up what's a good entry level series, that's pretty much the recommended Kamen Rider series to get into, which I do recommend for anyone who's interested in getting into tokusatsu. So yeah, this in all, the day 2 wasn't as horrible as the first day, as I already mentioned. It's due to the increased amount of staff and a significant decrease in the number of people attending from the previous day, where we were pretty much shoulder to shoulder squeezing and stuff, and having a lot of more inconsiderate people taking selfies and chatting in the hall when it's already apparent you can't fucking move. But you know, I estimate a good 10 to 20% decrease in the amount of people, which really helped, I guess. I also took a more social approach, which is why my experience might have increased, and I tried to approach a lot of people cosplaying a Kamen Rider as well. So my lack of time to brood with how shitty the convention was probably a big contributor to my lack of hate towards the event, and the things I absolutely loathed on the first day were pretty much fixed since the staff was increased, as I mentioned before. So all in all, yeah. Also, memorizing the layout and knowing where to go instead of just relying on the staff to direct people was a much better approach in hindsight, because it helped me move around, because there was a lot less of me being lotted into deceiving lines. For example, like entrances to areas such as going into places where panels were being held. There were a lot of random lines that went to nowhere, or were just kind of existed because people wanted a place to rest. And you would think that there was a line going into these places since they were literally right next to the stairs and people were standing there as if they were lining up. But in actuality, you can just walk in, which in my opinion was pretty dumb, because they didn't really do a good job of telling you where the line ends and stuff. And for those that did, it was pretty ham-fisted, and because there were so many random lines, it was kind of hard to tell if there wasn't a person holding up an iPad saying the line ends here, which there were a few. I would say there were a few, but it wasn't very helpful, because if you don't even know where the line ends or starts, then you wouldn't even look to where the guy holding the sign would be in the first place. So yeah, adding on to the point with knowing the layout better, and in general my previous day of just like, you know, memorizing the layout, It definitely helped because I got to buy the things I wanted much quicker and easier as I knew where to get them. And the lack of huge lines and crowds constantly moving and shoving me away on the first day much helps because I could just walk there, buy the things, not feel pressured to have to fuck off because I felt like if I was just standing there, I would be contributing to the problem. But since there was so much more space, I was like, oh, I could just chill a bit and just look at some of these pins, like on the sidelines where I'm not disturbing anyone's. So that definitely helped with the situation and look at the merchandises that were available. After all that, I went to one of the panels where they were talking about character designs for the Fiesta and the overall team, which I didn't really know was a thing. And like I said, the lack of, apparent designs in the hallways and stuff kind of also didn't help because, they didn't do a good job of displaying the fact there was a team unless you really did your research or read through the whole itinerary word for word. This was made even more apparent by the overwhelming silence from the audience in the panel when the guy was asking like, hey, any of you know the team or that there was a team in this thing? And that was really sad to me when everyone was like, what? There was a team? Because the art team clearly displayed that they put a lot of effort and thought into the designs of the characters that weren't given much space to shine in context of the whole venue aside from a few ham-fisted appearances in the itinerary book which we were given and a few explanations on the website which was in this weird I mean you had to peruse through the whole website and go through every single tiny section to find out there was a team. So I only found out later when I was checking out the website and reading about the thing. And might I add, half the itinerary book was pretty much sponsor bullshit. So I can't really fault people for not knowing there's a team because it's really hard to figure it out. So yeah, moving on. Another event I decided to go for was a concert at the end of the day. It was called the Night Jam, where a few hundred people lined up for it. And I was one of those fools, and we all got kicked out half an hour later. The artists who were playing the shows were pretty popular, so I heard from my friends. They were the Higashi Kitty Band and Myth and Royd. We pretty much stood there for the bulk of the people who were downstairs, because this was the stage space, and I said before, there was this escalator you had to go up to. So we were downstairs, and the auto gates were closed. So we stood there stupidly for half an hour before we were told to fuck off, because the hall was full. And there was actually, I found out about this later, because my friend told me there was a Discord group that I wasn't aware of about the Comic Fiesta thing. Apparently they distributed some QR codes or something. And when I entered it, a lot of people mentioned that in the hall upstairs there were people lining up there as well. So that was pretty bad of the management to not tell us that standing there in sweat. Let me tell you also, let me note that this was outdoors. Like there was like half the line was like maybe 3/4 of the line was indoors, but the line where I started standing at was already the quarter in front, and this was outdoors, and this is Malaysia where it's fucking hot, so people are just sweating and like wanting to start riots. It was just a bad situation all in all. I would show a picture of the crowd 10 to 15 minutes later when the bulk of us was told to fuck off by the security team. And in hindsight, I should have known better that waiting there wasn't gonna amount to much, since I did go to the thing earlier where they had a fighting tournament of some sorts. I think it was the Konami game or something. It was a Dragon Ball thing. But I should have known that there was a line upstairs. That's why they stopped people from entering in the first place. But yeah, it's also a damn shame to find out later that according to some people on the Discord team, and a few people on Reddit who commented, that there were a lot of people at the back who entered for the sake of entering since it was free, because the entry was free since you paid for the 30 ringgit entry fee, which I will talk about much later. But it's kind of sad to know that a lot of people outside who genuinely wanted to see the band missed out as a result of people just like, hey, this is a concert, let's just stand at the back here and look as enthusiastic as possible. But yeah, the crowd almost started rioting outside when the security told us like, hey, no, you can't stand here anymore. And luckily my friend stopped one of the main rioters, which was a damn shame, because there could have been a good opportunity for a video. And I was one of those fools who was shouting, but it's okay, no one needs to know that. Moving on. As I said earlier, that's pretty much my my experience and my journey throughout the whole day. So I guess we can finally move on to my overall thoughts and my criticisms on the whole event in overall, because most of my views are negative on the damn thing. This year's Comic Fiesta had the set entry fee of 30 ringgit per day, which I heard was the same throughout its existence, so I don't really have much of a comment there, except I do feel that it's a bit much. The early bird tickets were pretty much useless in my opinion, because I noticed some of the people that attended remarked that it would be just easier to just purchase the ticket on the spot, even though you have to wait an hour, because early bird entries get to enter at 9 a.m. and the people buy the ticket have to start at 10 a.m. And also another thing to note is that both the early bird tickets and the ticket on the spot are the same price. However, another negative is that the early bird ticket forces you to purchase both days on the checkout. So there's no option to I just want an early bird ticket for day 1 or day 2, because I know it might suck. And maybe in hindsight, they might have known that they would have fucked it up and people might not come back for day 2. So they quickly said oh, you can only buy for both days. Grand total of 60 ringgit may not seem like much for a convention, but when that convention feels cheap and feels like it should be a convention that should be free, I feel that price is a bit too high, especially when the aforementioned Big Bad Wolf book convention I mentioned in the introduction earlier was free, but looked a million times better in terms of aesthetics, as well as not having ham-fisted sponsors attacking you in certain segments. And yeah, but I seriously hope that I'll give them the benefit of the doubt, and that maybe they thought that, the event was worth going to, because both days did have their own list of panels and performances. So, oh well. One of my friends commented that they could have done a better job of decorating the place without the profits they were getting, especially since the main convention hall, as I mentioned earlier, was really empty, and as a result, cheapened the experience to some extent. It's pretty much a giant empty ceiling above us with some nice white lights. And like I said before, the only team the con was going for, I found out along with my friends, only found out during the fucking panel. Couldn't they have afforded a few mascots, some banners, or cutouts of characters they designed for the con's team? Also, couldn't they have done a better job of giving us an entrance kit? All we got was a fucking plastic bag with the itinerary, a metal straw, and some miscellaneous papers that I couldn't give a fuck about, because most of the decent freebies I got that were from the booths were people advertising their goods and stuff, and those were much better in hindsight. Is it so difficult to have a free bottle of water or a cheap pin that was being given out by other booths anyways? Some form of memorabilia that isn't going to be discarded after the event ends. It's not so much of a critique on the quality of what goods they are giving, but rather a critique that's nothing to talk about because they give nothing. My friend joked that they spent all the money on the tickets to print the books for their sponsor, which may be true, because I mentioned earlier, half the fucking itinerary was about the sponsors and all the vouchers you could get by signing up to them. But who knows, right? Who knows? It's just, I don't know. It's more of I guess it's a very petty thing for me to say that they should give us something free. But if I'm paying 30 ringgit a day, at least give us something that someone sells for a ringgit, or you can buy in bulk, because people might be dehydrated, or in the when you're hiking up your prices of sodas to be 5 ringgit, as should be expected with cons, at least give some form of not allowing your people to dehydrate and sweat out, because a lot of people commented they were really sweaty as a result of how many people they are forced to be stuck with. And I'll talk about the canteens later and the food booths, but it's not a pretty sight. And the way it's just I don't know. Is it really that hard to give free water? I guess something cheap. I really don't know. In bulk, whatever. As I mentioned earlier, on the booths were really repetitive, especially in the creative art market, which honestly lacked the creative part of the name. The area was flooded with booths selling the same pin designs, and in some cases pirated CDs and plagiarized art they printed out. And some people who were far more knowledgeable than I am commented on the lack of stickers of authenticity on some of the cases. Found this a bit of a waste, from not just a lack of diversity, but also the fact that most of these things can be purchased online with better quality designs, options, and prices. What's the point of me attending this if I can just buy the exact same thing online without having to fight with other people just to stand straight and not to have to sweat myself to dehydration, essentially. Though I will note there were a few good artists who were doing commissions and selling their artwork along with live drawing demonstrations, which I did enjoy watching. I just wish that more of them were given spotlight rather than like pin sellers and art plagiarizers, which, because as a result of so many of them, the minority of art workers were closed for commissions on the second day because there were way too many requests for this tiny populace, I presume. And yeah, I also did hear some news that apparently some of the older con booths were not allowed to attend because they wanted to give rise to newer booths, which is a shame, because I felt like having more artists is a good thing as opposed to allowing some new booths that first of all don't really have much of a quality check, and secondly are literally selling the same exact pin designs. It's kind of a shame you're replacing good actual artists who has had good reputation and a good line of sales and customers who would happily come back next year, to be pretty much kicked out and not allowed to attend this year because you wanted some new artists that you didn't even bother checking on. But yeah. And we can finally talk about the food choices, which I detested. All they had to offer in terms of food booths, I can't even call them booths because they're literally just built-in canteens. They were just two school quality canteens with a maid cafe, which was pretty empty for the most part because it was a bit overpriced, as my friend would say. I personally didn't know because I didn't really even bother about it. But it was just bad. Most of the people that wanted to eat just ended up walking to nearby KLCC to get food, as the food options were just poorly planned and prepped, and it's just bad. It's like there's no reason for you to eat in there because the food is like, you might as well go to a high school. They can serve better fucking food than that, in all honesty. Or the nearby like the mamaks and stuff. It's just and we can finally move to the biggest negative to the event, which I have talked about a lot, which is the fucking management and security to an extent, since they both pretty much go hand in hand. As far as I saw, there were only 2 paramedics walking at any time. Might I add, through the really sardine crowds, which I've mentioned throughout many times, and the staff didn't really do a good job of diverting the traffic, which was horrendous, especially at intersections, because like, you know, T sections that come from left, right, straight, back, everywhere, in every direction. This didn't improve until like, especially on day 1. This was very blatant on day 1. They didn't do much to do anything until a few hours later when they were like, well, this is getting out of hand. And they finally decided to help direct people to events or help divert the traffic and tell selfie takers to fuck off and not stand in the middle of the line and have a nice conversation. And most of the staff, might I add, were on the balcony taking pictures of the hall instead of helping, which was not a good sign at all. And like I said earlier, it did get better on the second day, because there were, first of all, lesser people in general, and noticeable increment in the number of staff members. I guess they did learn from their mistakes, so I'll give them +1 for that. But I'll take that away because they should have known, because the hall can't accommodate that many people in hindsight. So yeah, there's also a blatant, clear lack of communication displayed throughout the event, from the traffic diversion to the final concert where they took ages to announce the stage and halls that they were full and unable to accommodate for more people, which could have been done half an hour fucking earlier, as the sliding doors were barricaded the whole time and people were just standing there wondering, what the fuck are we doing here? And we were just left stranded there, just like in this really uncomfortable in the outdoors. And let me tell you, if it didn't rain that day, I think it would have been even worse, because Malaysia is that hot. It was just so obvious that they could have taken action, because it's so obvious they couldn't accommodate for everyone from the get-go. So I have no idea why it took so long for security to take action, aside from, you know, the clear fire hazard, that because there were a lot of people clumped together in one space. Like, why couldn't you have taken action if you already knew you couldn't fucking let those people in anyways? Anyways, enough of negativity, I guess. I should talk a bit about the positives, although I guess it's a double-edged sword, since the positive is pretty much not to do with the event, because the biggest highlight of the damn thing was the community of people and cosplayers. I find that the only saving grace was the fact that people kept their heads up and really tried to be outgoing and participate with the people around them. From the PewDiePie supporters with, banners and signs, picket signs, looking for people to support PewDiePie and subscribe and all that fiasco, people looking for pictures, posing with others, cosplaying, trying their best. It really did save the event from being this complete utter shit show, in my opinion. The event essentially on its own felt like a pay to enter, so you can spend more money anyways. Like, if given the choice and I knew better, I probably wouldn't even have bothered buying a ticket to enter the goddamn hall. Because what's the point of entering the convention if I can be outside and enjoy the atmosphere of the park outside? That is much better, because all the cosplayers are exiting anyways and would go to the park to take pictures. And what's the point if I can just stand here in this cool, nice park looking at people and enjoying the atmosphere rather than being packed like sardines in a can? Might I add, I have to pay to be packed like sardines in a can. Like, literally, the amount of people leaving was getting more than those entering at one point, and I far enjoyed the atmosphere outside, as people did not just have to be afraid, aside from being afraid of being claustrophobic and fighting for space, but have this nice open park to cosplay, show off their costumes, not be afraid that props are going to get destroyed, and take pictures with fans and meet up with fellow attenders, because there is no way in hell you could have done that inside anyways. I would honestly go twice the mile to go to a free community event in a fucking public park than have to be stuck in a commercialized shit show that doesn't really do much for the people involved, which is a damn shame, because there is a very clear love and sense of understanding and community. And I feel like it's such a shame that the biggest con is a con, which is just really scummy. All in all, like, concluding this, I would really say my enjoyment of the event stemmed more from the community, if that wasn't made apparent enough at this point. The event itself felt like commercialized garbage. Lack of care and thought put in by the management is a little aggravating, especially when free conventions do a far better job without blatant sponsors roaming and clogging up parts of the con. If not for the community and people I met throughout, I would have probably not even thought of coming back for a second fucking day if it meant burning my ticket and just throwing 30 ringgit down the drain. Like, fuck that. Why would I go to this convention just to get squished up and just, like, die of suffocation? For a paid event, this is extremely disappointing for a newcomer who has no emotional attachment to previous years. Like I've mentioned many times throughout, I don't think the event was even worth the price. It felt like a horrible cash grab on its own, if not for the people who made my experience somewhat positive and bearable. Definitely won't be going back next year, but not because I detest the event completely, but it's because I'm studying overseas, as I mentioned in my introduction in episode 1. But I might revisit in 2020 if I do have the time. I'll definitely do more research and be a bit more cautious, and by that, I wouldn't buy the fucking early bird tickets and see for myself how the event looks before diving headfirst into the thing. But I sure as hell won't be going out of my way to check it out if I'm doing anything else for that day. Would I recommend this to anyone? For the experience, I suppose you could, but I lack the knowledge and experience to be able to say if there's any better or cheaper events such as Comic Fiesta for purely experience purposes, like for the sake of seeing cosplayers and being in a community of anime watchers and manga readers. I really recommend against it if you're going with a larger group of friends or on a date, unless you intend to split up and do your own thing, since the only way to talk would be to shout or be really close to each other, ear to ear, because there's a million other people in between you. I'd also recommend against it if you have claustrophobia or any sorts of expectations, because it honestly feels cheap and free. If not for the experience of being in a con and telling your friends you've gone to a con, I wouldn't really see any real reasons to go. Also, any cosplayers, obviously that's a reason to go, I guess. But if you're just a casual person, I mean, it's honestly better just standing outside the convention hall, since all the cosplayers are eventually coming outside anyways, since the hall is horrible to be in for extended periods of time. Plus, you got a nice park to sit in with free water from the water fountain, which is outside and not inside the hall, might I add. But yeah, I do apologize that this has become somewhat of a really long and negative rant. Suppose you can't really even call this rambling, because I'm literally just talking shit about an event because of how strongly I felt against it. But the main reason I did say I might revisit it in 2020 is because I do feel that there's some hope for the management to learn from their mistakes and move forward, because it's quite evident that the volunteers did put some effort to it, because it's not like they completely ignored the bad things that happened throughout. Like in day 1 and day 2, when the traffic things, I guess, even though it was extremely slow and the lack of communication was clear. At least they did something. So I hope that maybe in the future they'll learn from their mistakes and my experience won't be as horrible and shit as it was based on the event itself. But just based on that fact alone, and if 2020 push comes to shove, they're still really bad, I'm probably just gonna never go again. In all honesty, I'll give them a year to like improve and stuff, but I'll bite my tongue. That's about all there is from me for now. I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.